very gratified by, and we've had some very important contributions there. So thank you very much for coming and for your support. I know there's a number of you that are regulars here. And this evening we're addressing the issue of the Australia-Japan security relationship, where to from here. This relationship with Japan has evolved significantly over the past 6 decades or so. It's continuing to evolve at a rapid pace at a time of significant changes in power relativities in our region. So this is going to be an important discussion. We've got 3 excellent speakers with different perspectives to offer on this. For those of you who have been here before, you will know, and for those of you who haven't, let me reiterate that we keep this a very focused discussion. Our speakers will address you for around 15 minutes. We've asked each of them to bring their remarks to a conclusion with some practical options to advance this security relationship between Australia and Japan, and how we can do that in a policy-relevant way. And then, after around 45 minutes, this is very much an interactive exercise. So the questions and comments from you will take us into the last half hour or so, and we try very keenly to run these seminars on time and have you out of here by 6:40 or 6:45 at the latest. I'd like to start with our first speaker, who's Allan McKinnon from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Allan will set the scene for this discussion in terms of the framework of policy and where it's headed. Allan's a long-serving officer of the former Department of Trade, now the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He's had 2 postings to Tokyo. In fact, returned, I think, in January this year after 3.5 years as Deputy Head of Mission in Tokyo. He's been involved over many years in Australian trade policy and in many aspects of the relationship with Japan. And he's currently Head of the International Security Division in DFAT. So Allan brings both practical experience and a long involvement in these issues. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Allan, and ask you to address your remarks.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's a great crowd to get here. I've seen old family friends, old colleagues, and my old Japanese teacher, so it's almost everyone. I'm just going to set the background of what the security relationship is about and how we arrived at the point we have. In essence, we've got a very long-standing relationship, and the security relationship in a way is too. Japan and Australia were allies of Britain in World War I. Of course, World War II was a different story, and there was a lingering post-war resentment that meant for many years the relationship was largely a one-dimensional one, as it was built strongly on trade. Tourism, culture and education came a little bit later. But as the relationship evolved and expanded, there was growing trust, familiarity and public acceptance on both sides, and importantly a strategic convergence driven by a shared interest in an open, peaceful Asia-Pacific, support for the role of the United States in maintaining that situation, and a cooperation together on regional architecture. So the 80s, 90s and noughties saw the emergence of a more fully rounded partnership with cooperative pursuit of various mutual interests. But there was one significant missing element for many Japan watchers, and that was a strong security cooperation component. We were 2 spokes of security hubs with the US, but we weren't connected ourselves. And I think that Australia took the lead, took the initiative in pushing for the insertion of a strong security component in the relationship. And eventually, as the relationship continued to grow, that effort took fruit. And what we had, I think, was a very important development in 2007 with the signing of the Australia-Japan Joint Declaration on Security Cooperation. Much of what I want to say now is about establishing frameworks, and it's very important we think about it in those terms. The joint declaration that we signed with Japan, that's the first one that Japan had with any other country other than the United States. And so it's best viewed as a framework for security cooperation under a whole lot of headings. Law enforcement, border security, counter-terrorism, disarmament, counter-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, maritime aviation security, peace operations and humanitarian relief operations. Many of those things we were doing to some smaller or lesser degree, but we were finding it very sticky and difficult to work with the Japanese. And what this this framework gave us was a document that said, look, we do cooperate on these things. And so it was much easier to go into the Ministry of Defence or the Foreign Ministry and to say, well, look, here's the political cover. And that made it much easier to raise new initiatives. We had an intended action plan to implement the Security Cooperation Agreement. That was endorsed a couple of years later, and that's basically the mechanism by which we get action items onto the agenda. So from that little beginning, the establishment of a framework, a very important initiative, I can't stress it enough, to start these patterns of cooperation on policy in this area. We signed a Memorandum on Defence Cooperation in 2008, barely a year later. That reflected, I guess, a gradual maturation of the defence relationship and the intent to further cooperate in areas such as counter-terrorism, disaster relief, humanitarian assistance. And it's amazing how often we have done that with the Japanese Defence Forces in recent years. But that also contained a commitment to develop an annual calendar of defence activities. We didn't want this to be just the establishment of a framework. We wanted to drive it ahead with mechanisms that meant that each year we refresh it, we put more things in there, we do more. And its formal commitment as well to regular bilateral defence ministers' meetings. So, a key development is that bilateral on security and defence issues, and we call that a 2+2, defence and foreign ministers together. Now that dialogue is one of only 3 that Australia has worldwide of that nature, the others being with the United States and the United Kingdom. So again, it's special, setting up that framework. It reflected the shared perspectives on regional and global security that we're increasingly sharing with Japan. And again, you know, it's not surprising when we're 2 spokes out from the United States hub that we had many shared perspectives on security in the Asia-Pacific region. The last 2+2 meeting held in May this year in Tokyo demonstrated the breadth now of that security relationship. We discussed issues ranging from global and regional strategic issues through to developments on the Korean Peninsula, in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran's nuclear program, and it really served as an opportunity for both Australia and Japan to reiterate the importance in their respective relationships of the relationship with the United States and the US role in the Asia-Pacific. Now, flowing as well from the framework we've established, we then moved on to other areas that were seen as impediments to enhance defence cooperation, and so we set up an acquisition and cross-servicing agreement called AXA. What that's about is basically saying our defence forces can cross-supply each other without having to go to the Diet or the Parliament to decide whether they can pass some water over to the other defence forces or they can pass a truck over or something like that. So it really is a very practical measure to make sure that as we get used to patterns of cooperation, the logistics part of that is all made easier and sort of facilitated to the degree that we need. So that was a very important outcome of the May meeting, 2+2 this year, where the Defence and Foreign Ministers got together. It basically outlines the treaty basis for mutual logistics support and cooperation, and it makes it easier for us to cooperate. I said it's a defence cooperation, but it's about disaster relief, joint peacekeeping operations in third countries, all of those things that we've started to do together and find increasingly we need to make it the logistics part of the work. So it's basically about interoperability of our defence forces, and again highlighting the increasingly special closeness of the relationships. Japan's only has one other relationship like that, and that's obviously the United States. A further element to the growing closeness of the relationship is what we call a trilateral strategic dialogue. And that's basically where we, Japan and the United States get together and discuss the whole gamut of security, strategic issues together, share our perspectives live. Now that provides a very effective forum for the promotion of shared values and interests. It covers areas of cooperation, again, counter-terrorism, peacekeeping operations, humanitarian relief, that same menu of things that confronts us, and basically enables us to ensure that we're seeing things, or at least have the same perception of things. Again, for both Australia and Japan, the trilateral security dialogue demonstrates the centrality of that US relationship and the way we can work together. Now, talking about key areas of cooperation on opportunities for further cooperation, we have a lot of experience working together on issues like counter-terrorism, the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament agenda, disaster relief, addressing pandemics and so forth. And we continue to cooperate on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, peacekeeping and nation building. A couple of examples of that. We looked after the Japanese Force of Engineers, Reconstruction Engineers in Samar in southern Iraq. Our infantry and the actual protective force around them. We have close cooperation in UN peacekeeping operations, and Australia assisted Japan with its dispatch of Japanese military liaison personnel to UNMET in Timor-Leste, the UN force. And one of my defence colleagues at one time said to me that, you know, if you added up all the times where we cooperated with Japanese defence forces on peacekeeping, humanitarian assistance and others, you might find that we actually on the ground cooperate more with them than almost anybody else, perhaps even including the United States. I think he was making a point, but the point is a good one. We've got a lot of contact with the Japanese defence forces in different contexts, and that's why we need to work on that stuff, the basic nuts and bolts of interoperability and getting shared perspectives on things. We're also, apart from those sorts of things, undertaking now regular bilateral defence exercises as well as joint training and airlift cooperation. A lot of those, again, focus on disaster relief operations. These are about building patterns of cooperation and knowledge of each other's way of working. But we also have ones that are more obviously completely defence focused. In April this year, the Royal Australian Navy and the Japan Maritime Self-Defence Forces participated in exercise Nichigor Trident, and that was aimed at enhancing the two navies' abilities to work together during maritime coalition operations. And of course that logistics agreement, the AXA that I talked about before, that has great potential to make those operations work a lot better. Strong history of proliferation on nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament issues, and Japan and Australia have now established a cross-regional grouping to try to take forward that whole agenda of non-proliferation and disarmament coming out of the UN. We have a 5-year review of the non-proliferation treaty this year, 64 follow-on actions now. Who takes them forward? Well, Japan and Australia think it's very natural for us to put together a group ranging from UAE and Turkey through to Netherlands and Mexico, and we're going to take that agenda forward. We're also currently negotiating a bilateral level agreement on information security, and this is going to provide a legal framework for sharing information more, and that again will allow, it's basically about greasing the logistical wheels. If we can share more information about all sorts of things, then we're better able to act together. So that's another groundbreaking agreement with Japan. Now you can see that I just want to mention now some of the challenges and drivers of what the relationship is about. Well, obviously the rise of China is a very big one, and it's changing everything. Economic, trade, of course, strategic equations. And Japanese foreign policy is increasingly dominated by a focus on China's development and expansion of influence across the region. And I noticed that during my time in Japan, which finished in Japan this year, in January this year I should say, compared to 10 years ago, it's very apparent now that there's a one-on-one focus on China in almost every decision Japan makes about strategic security, military, resource procurement, and so China's now moved to the very central state globally, but for Japan, we're hanging right over them there, very much so. Japan, of course, recognises the need for effective engagement and exchange with China, and it's profited hugely from China's economic development. It's been one of the things that's lifted the Japanese economy back out of well, it's not out of the slump completely, but made the slump less flatline than it might have been. But they're still concerned by China's relative lack of transparency in the development of their military budget, military power, especially in relation to maritime capabilities. And of course that concern about Chinese maritime activities has been heightened in recent times by the confrontation over the Senkaku Islands. And so as China's relative political, military and economic strength grows, Japan feels increasingly sort of nervous. There's an interplay, of course, back into the US relationship. When the Minshuko, the change of government from the LDP to the DPJ occurred, there was a sense that the Futenma base issue was back on the agenda, and that caused some strains in the US relationship. Well, the growing sort of nervousness about China, I think, has pushed that relationship back together very, very closely. For us, we work with China as a friend. We don't see ourselves as a meat and sandwich there. So for Australia, it's a matter of sort of being open and trying to sort of make sure that within the region that any sort of points of tension are managed. Other issues affecting the development of the security relationship bureaucratic culture is an important one. For Japan, they're almost the opposite of us. We're very flexible, we don't have great budgets. Japan's got great budgets, but it locks them in about 18 months out. So if we come up with an idea, they say we can't do it for a couple of years because we've got to be committed. And so we have to find a way of working with Japan. There's a political deadlock as well. That's a bit of a problem about Japan extending the relationship. All the more important why these issues of framework and structure are necessary to get in place, because that's enabled the whole thing to work. So that's a quick skate through about why the relationship has arrived at security, at this focus on security. It was a missing element. How much of it has sprung from the 2007 Joint Declaration, how that's spawned other treaties, treaty-level sort of commitments on logistical cooperation and so forth, and given us a way to build on that further, as our next two speakers will explain how we should. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Allan. And can I just through you thank the department very much for its support for the college in these seminar programs. It's very useful for us to have the scene set and obviously to point to some developments that are often somewhat beneath the radar in terms of the evolution of these relationships. So thank you very much. I'd now like to very warmly welcome to Australia and to this particular seminar Dr. Masashi Nishihara, and thank him very much for coming this evening. Dr. Nishihara is a graduate of the University of Kyoto and the University of Michigan. He currently is president of the Research Institute for Peace and Security in Tokyo. Prior to that, he was president of the National Defence Academy at Yokosuka. And he's been in that position, he was in that position from the year 2000 to 2006, and before that for more than 2 decades as a professor of international relations. In addition to his academic work, which puts him really at the cutting edge of international best practice, he's been involved in a range of international commissions over the years, involved in various aspects of contributions to public policy formulation at both a national and an international level. So this evening we have what I would call a real star in this field, and I really very much appreciate the cooperation we've had with the Koko Foundation, which has brought Dr. Nishihara to Australia to enable him to come here this evening to our seminar. For the next 20 minutes or so, I think we'll be hearing from someone who's made a real impact on scholarly work in relation to Japan's evolution and also Japan's engagement with the international community. And so it gives me very great pleasure indeed to ask Dr. Nishihara to address us.
Thank you very much for the very kind words. I am honored and very pleased to be invited to this forum. I just got here this morning from Tokyo, so I'm a little bit sleepy. My brain may not function very well, but I'd like to respond to what Mr. McKinnon about the framework he has laid out for Japan-Australian security relationships. But before going into this, I just want to say a few things about myself. I was a visiting fellow here in New York many years ago, 1979. But since I have been there several times, but every time I come here, the campus sort of get more crowded with buildings. It's one of the latest ones I've heard, but it's a nice looking building. It's very nice to be here. Since Mr. McKinnon has read out the framework of Australia-Japan security relationship, I'd like to raise some of the questions about the relationship between two countries, particularly security relationships. As he said, we have 2+2, we have AXA, and all these the arrangements that the two countries have achieved. My question here is, are we really going, how far or where are we going from here? Are we really semi-allies? Are we partners? In what way are we really trying to help each other? Japan is ally of the United States, so is Australia. But if there were no alliance between Japan and the US, Japan and Australia, actually Japan and the US and Australia and the US, thus Japan and Australia will become much closer, close as we are now. And will not be a subsidiary in a way of the alliance between with the United States. Without the US acting as a main kind of instigator, can we be really allies? If so, in what way can we really help each other? So my first point is mutual dependency between Japan and Australia is still very weak, although we talk about 2+2 and ACTA and so forth. So the question, of course, is should the mutual dependency become stronger? And Japan really needs Australia's help in case Japan's security is in danger. We have been helping each other, for example, working together in Iraq, East Timor, or we used to work in Cambodia, and so forth. Even today, our air forces are in Pakistan and working with Australian medical teams. And so that sort of international activity is important. But I think the core of the security relationship should be the one that in case either country is in danger, with the other side will really help. In what way can we really do it? US and Japan are in that position. The United States first wants to maintain its international position, wants to hedge China and other issues. The Cold War first, the Soviet Union was the main enemy, and so they did need it. They do need their bases in Japan. Japan, in turn, like to have the United States on our side, so that in case we are in danger, US can help us. So there is a interest, security interests of two countries, Japan and the United States, do converge. Therefore, we do have an alliance. Now, does this happen to Japan-Australia relationships? Today, China is a big issue, but I want to come back to China issue a bit later, and I want to say that at this moment. Next question I would like to raise is, how important are Japan and Australia to each other? Suppose you would be asked, what are the top 5 countries that Australia really need for their security? Japan will be included, or will not be included. The same way for Japan. I may be wrong, but if we ask the Australia's top 5 partners, security partners, you may begin with the United States, or UK, or I don't know, New Zealand, or then which countries of the rest they remain? Maybe Japan, maybe Indonesia. Today, Australia thinks Japan is the most important country in Asia. Therefore, I would say that Japan may be included, but I'd like to sort of ask the Australian friends here. The same way for Japan. Who are the top 5 partners for Japan's security? I can begin, of course, with the United States, and then, should we say, South Korea? Over there, what? Australia, UK, and so on. Today, we have a very strong security arrangement frameworks, as Mr. McKinnon mentioned. Therefore, I should say that after US, perhaps Australia. But because of the distance between the two countries, it is difficult for us to come up with a strong arrangement in that sense. In that sense, South Korea is more important for us. Geographically very close, but we do share some of the common security threats, and also despite the historical tensions, animosities between South Koreans and Japan, still we now say that the relationship between South Korea and Japan is very important. And there is a kind of conversion of the security interests between two countries. now have joint exercises with South Koreans. We do have ministerial talks and so on and so forth. Now, Australia and Japan have many more of the ministerial meetings, beginning with 2+2, as was mentioned before. But our relations with South Korea are different from our relations with Australia. Perhaps Australians will ask, it's the third point, perhaps Australians will ask, if the Japanese are more willing to play a larger security role, that would be very good for Australia. Therefore, it is Japan's fault that we cannot really improve the security, promote and strengthen security relations with Japan. Yes, I agree with most of that argument because Japan has the constitutional constraints. It's a self-imposed, once set by a constitution back in 1946, then got to revise the constitution or modify the interpretation of the constitution so that we can play a larger security role, but still very difficult because of the domestic, strong domestic group which is still resistant. Today, the DPJ government still have many of those people at the top leadership. Therefore, it is difficult to revise the interpretation of the constitution. But nonetheless, today there is some room for change. Just as of yesterday, before I came to Japan, I left Japan, there was an evening newspaper which reports that the government, the DPJ government, may relax its arms export ban policy. In the past, Japan has had this arms export ban policy, therefore practically Japan could not really export arms, but now they want to relax. Now this will enlarge an opportunity for Japan and Australia to work on the exchange of arms, joint production, co-production of arms and so forth. Both are technologically, I think, competent to produce better arms in the future, and that will also help the interoperability of arms between two countries. That would also provide a larger opportunity for us to work more actively. We have restrictions of multinational peace missions, or the restrictions of the use of force. How much time do I have? That restrictions, but again, if we can change, Japanese side can change the interpretation of the constitutional restrictions, we can expand. Therefore, though I have started to say that there's difficulties in promoting and strengthening the security relationship, much of it may be in the Japanese side. Therefore, if we can change the modification, change the interpretations, we can seem to be able to do a lot. But even at the current constitutional restraints, we can do more. For example, naval exercises, joint exercises in East China Seas, or we can make use of U.S. bases in Guam so that we can do a joint exercise in that area as well. I think it's more important maybe the joint maritime exercises in the area where the Chinese naval activities are becoming to be very strong. Exchange of information, intelligence, missile defense, and so forth are very important. But for a few minutes, I want to just spend about China. Spend my time with China. I think China has become such a big issue, particularly in the last few months. And you probably are aware of the island incident that has given us a sort of wake-up call. No, we have been talking about, we've been aware about the growth of Chinese naval activities, but China seems to have changed its policy, its posture vis-a-vis foreign countries, particularly Japan. They think they can sanctions against Japan. They think they can. They have done it actually. They can also pick on the Japanese vulnerabilities and try to put down the Japanese power in that sense. So although two countries, China and Japan, have been talking about the quote, strategically neutral relationships, unquote, this is not simply working. I have argued in Japan that it's a fallacy, it's an illusion, but nonetheless, China is our neighbor. We have to find out it's a working relationship, but nonetheless, I think we have to be careful, we have to be more strong about the Chinese naval posture in that area. In that sense, the Japan, United States, Australia, perhaps Korea, perhaps Vietnam, those countries who are concerned about China's naval activities should have an opportunity to get closer and to see how we can do it. We don't have to contain China, but we can at least develop hedging strategy against China. I think China will continue for some time to come to be more dominant power in the future, although some of us argue that China's economy may not grow as fast as seen in the past decades, but nonetheless, we ought to keep that in mind. Anyway, I started to say that security relationships between Australia and Japan are good, but how far do we go is questionable. But I have been ending here my talk with the possibility and importance of developing further relationships, particularly China. In a way, in that sense, China is helping us to strengthen our relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nishihara, and I'm sure there's those questions you raised will be taken up in questions fairly eagerly in a few minutes' time. I'd now like to introduce our final speaker this evening before we do move to questions, Professor Kent Anderson. Kent is Professor of Culture, History and Language in the College of Asia Pacific here at the ANU. He's also got a co-appointment at the ANU College of Law. Has a background which is involved in an academic sense in work in Japan over many years. In fact, before coming to the ANU, had an appointment at Hokkaido University. So I think Kent brings a real understanding of Japanese society and values to this discussion in a broader setting than simply a security or foreign policy one. I'm delighted that Kent's been able to come back again. He's been a great supporter of the college in our first few months, and it's a real privilege to have him back here.
Thank you, Marcel. I just got a bit of a cold, so we have this giant mic, so I'm sure I'll do all right. But after those two first speakers, question is, what more do you need to know? I mean, I think they've laid it all out there. I've presented in the past with Allan, and so I knew that I needed to do something a little bit different, because in the past it sounded as if we were singing off the same song sheets. And so today what I want to do is we've had two very specific talks on the security relationship, and what I'd like to do is cast it more broadly on the overall relationship, but then pull out the security aspect. Because I think the security relationship is better, you get an insight into the security relationship, placing it into the larger relationship. This talk I'm giving, I actually gave a version of it a few weeks back to the Australia-Japan Chamber, or Australia-Japan Societies. But seeing as today is the Emperor's birthday, and I imagine all of those people are across the lake celebrating it, I feel free to go off and use part of that talk again. My launching point from that talk was a good launching point from today as well. Our last ambassador, His Excellency Takaaki Kojima, on leaving gave a speech in this building where he said the Australia-Japan strategic partnership was at a crossroads. That was reported in our local Canberra Times as the ambassador fires a parting shot. And indeed, he had some sharp comments. And so I want to return to that question, and I think Professor Nishihara has raised it as well. Are we at a crossroads? Is this a strong enough relationship that it could survive if really tested? I want to answer it with a bit of a soft power look at the relationship. But that begins with, what kind of relationship are we talking about? Originally, it used to be described as a complementary relationship. We sold assets, Japan bought assets, we were all happy. From the 1990s, this developed much more along the lines that Allan has described around the strategic agenda. I've been arguing for the past few years, it's even deeper than that economic and that strategic, and it goes to what I call a normal relationship that includes things like culture, education, exchange at that level. It's been normalized, it's no longer exotic. But there's risks to each of those approaches. The economic, everyone knows Japan's got a plateaued economy, but what people fail to remember is that Japanese economy and the economic relationship with Australia is fundamentally different today than it was even 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it was based on trade. Now China has surpassed that. But the amount of foreign direct investment from China, or from Japan, going into Australia is significant. Let me just read off some of the list. Kirin's bought Lion Nathan and National Foods, Asahi has bought into Schweppes, Suntory has bought into Frucor, Mitsui has bought wind farms and uranium, Mitsubishi is developing coal and uranium. That's all in the last 2 years. Tremendous amounts of foreign direct investment, which we've never seen in the past. We've always bought commodities from each other, but we haven't had this kind of cross-investment. So we do have an important economic pillar to stand on, but it's transitioning in a more interconnected way. The second partnership is the security one. I think both Allan and Nishihara have picked this up very well. But I would just remind people that that relationship is constrained by Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which says Japan will not maintain air or sea or land forces. And that, we know we've gone a long way around that, but that still is what in other contexts I call a sea anchor on the relationship. It slows down Japanese strategic development. The third partnership, the one I expected an audience like today, we'd spend the least amount of time on, but I actually think it's very, very important, is the grassroots partnership. The level of exchange, indeed, shown by Nishihara Sensei's trip here in 1979, and probably every one of you who've hosted a Japanese visitor or spent time in Japan, that kind of grassroots exchange between the two countries is amazingly deep. The most commonly taught language, foreign language in Australia, at the primary, secondary, and university level is Japanese. This generation of students know more about Japan than any generation in the past. Also, tourism. We had, in the past, a very superficial kind of tourist. We had honeymooners stopping off in the Gold Coast for 3 days on their way to Noumea. The kind of tourism exchange that's going on now is fundamentally different. When my neighbor goes to spend 2 weeks skiing in Hokkaido, that's a very different trip, a very different experience than 3 days on the Gold Coast, and vice versa. The ecotourism that's going on, deepening, embedding, crossing these relationships at a much different, much more embedded and deeper level than we've seen in the past. So going through the three pillars, I'm arguing that the connections are closer than they used to be, and indeed close enough that I think they can sustain some pressure. That being said, there are challenges in the relationship. In November of 2009, Japan paid for a survey to be conducted of general population's reaction to Japan. 60% of Australians no longer saw Japan as a reliable friend. 60% of Australians no longer saw Japan as a reliable friend. Only 20% agreed that Japanese were trustworthy partners in the Pacific. That is very new. In 2006, the exact same question was asked of the Australian population, and the results were the exact opposite. 60% of Australians saw Japan as a reliable friend, and only 10% saw it as not a reliable friend. Moreover, this isn't some kind of lingering World War II sentiment. 88% of Australians say that Japanese involvement in the war was not important, or nonetheless they had a positive feeling with regards to Japan. This is a very new development that we have. So why is it then? The first question I asked I asked the Japanese government when they asked me why that was there, was when did you take the survey? And that matters because of whales and the whaling season. When were the whales going past the Sydney Harbour and the Sydney Morning Herald reporting on that? Also, what was going on with China and the China developments? And both of those, you remember, Herd Stew was in China at that time, and that was in the papers, and the whales were indeed going through Sydney Harbour. Those are important challenges for the relationship, and ones we should keep in the forefront of our mind, because they will test the relationship. So what can we do to revitalize the relationship? Michael ended his introduction by saying he wanted specific proposals. I'm probably not going to give specific enough proposal, but what I want to suggest is that if we better understand the mutual interest of both sides, then that will go towards a renewed commitment to the strategic partnership. And we do that, again, through this grassroots approach. I begin with what I call the acronym soup around the business world, and that's FTAs, EPAs, and most recently, TPPs. These are all acronyms for free trade agreements between Australia and Japan, and depending if you go down TPPs, including other countries such as the United States. Solving that puzzle, and I think we're closer than I've ever seen in the past, particularly with the stepping back on agriculture that Japan's made. 5 left, okay. I think we will crack that nut, and the economic can take the relationship forward. On whales, I'm on the record, and so I don't hesitate to say it again now with all those microphones up there, but I actually hold both sides to account. A middle ground needs to be found, and it can be found. Both sides need to work towards this compromised position, and it needs to take us forward. The last one on the grassroots, what I would emphasize is that the Australia of 2010, the Japan of 2010, is not the Australia or Japan that most people have in their minds. I think most people still have a Crocodile Dundee version of Australia, and most Australians still have a Michael Crichton Rising Sun kind of version of Japan, and they're fundamentally different countries nowadays. And so around grassroots, education and tourism are two areas. The investment that Australia is making in Japanese education is phenomenal, but we're not seeing the inverse investment of Japan for internationalization. Indeed, Japan's rates of people studying abroad have fallen 38%. We're getting fewer Japanese leaving the country. That is a problem where we can put more time. Tourism as well. The Yokoso campaign that Japan ran was fantastic for getting Australians to Japan. I think Australia would benefit from having a similar campaign that wasn't throwing more shrimps on the Barbie, but highlighting the kinds of things that appeal to the new demographic in Japan: ecotourism, cultural tourism. So what does that leave us for security? Well, I think for security we need to first understand the context. One, we're both countries dependent upon goods moving, either exporting or importing goods. Therefore, a free shipping lanes in the Southeast Asia are incredibly important to both of us. We're both countries that in the past have seen ourselves as middle powers, and therefore multilateral cooperation such as APEC or now the TPP are places where we excel. We're both countries where we've cooperated on peacekeeping, disaster relief, and we're both countries with a US partner. Those contextual facts in and of themselves lend to why this relationship at a security level is so important. but let me suggest 3 different frameworks to working through that partnership. One, you can think of the partnership as what I call bookends of peace in the West Pacific. Again, if you think of this, these 3 shipping lanes, the idea of having Japan in the north and Australia in the south, making sure that that is a free water zone, you can understand that concept. The second is an argument put forward by Peter Drysdale, which is talking about a fulcrum of rationality. That's my language, not Peter's. He would never claim it, I'm sure. But the idea is how Australia and Japan both straddle between China and the United States and can play a very positive role in having those 2 countries move forward in a positive way. And then the third way that we can think about the strategy is really the way that Allan and Nishihara Sensei were talking about, and that's triangulating back to the United States and creating a peaceful overall Asia-Pacific and democratic world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kent, and thanks for broadening the context of this discussion and certainly having a very solid go with some practical suggestions there. We've got about 20 minutes or so in which people can raise issues, ask questions, whatever they like of our presenters, or make their own points. If I could ask people to be brief, concise, for the answers to be relatively brief and concise, so we can get as many contributions as possible before we cut off, and I'd like to do that about 6:40. So the floor is now open. I might have to, I think, for the purposes of our vodcast, repeat the essence of your question so it goes onto the system. So I don't think I'm going there. Up to that.
Thank you all for an excellent presentation. I'm just wondering if any of you can comment, add your thoughts to what future, if any, for the short-lived quadrilateral security talks with India. And do you see any further development of that, or is that not going to?
Thank you. The question relates to the future of the quadrilateral idea involving Australia, Japan, US and India, which stalled some time ago. Allan, do you want to have a run at that?
I think you have answered that, Michael. It stalled some time ago. Of course, each of us separately has a very good dialogue with India, but the quadrilateral idea and architecture is not really bubbling on at the moment.
Any other? Thank you. Up to the back.
Michael Foley, ADVA. Keep it brief. Mentioned very importantly to understand mutual interests of both sides. No one's mentioned Russia so far, but look in terms of history. The West helped Japan defeat Russia, and they learned how to go bang bang. And they got a bridge into mainland Asia, and we've seen the historical legacy of that. So I'll play the devil's advocate. You can understand Chinese anxieties. They don't think they're going to have a Monroe Doctrine or American Lake, but they've got some ambitions, perhaps stoked by paranoia. But there's a neurosis seeped in history there, and I think as good diplomats like Allan will do, it's, some of these things can't be contained or constrained or even resolved. They're just going to be managed. It seems like a lot of war talk these days. I just hope that they keep it on an even keel. That's all. Diplomats do the talking rather than the military.
The issue goes to the motivations of Chinese policy in the Asia-Pacific region and the nature of it. I might ask Dr. Nishihara if you want to expound on some of your thoughts in your remarks on China.
There are many areas in which we don't quite understand how Chinese are working. For example, the relationship between the civilian authorities and the PLA. In the recent incident around Senkaku Island, we did not see the real further doubted the clear coordination between the two. It seems to me that the civilian authorities have sometimes don't have a full control over the PLA. The way that the PLA is putting naval forces in South East China Sea as well seems to be slightly different from what the civilian authorities
cooperation between Australia and Japan that the speakers have mentioned has been in the field of peacekeeping, as far as I can see. And in light of the fact that the Australian government's 2009 white paper stated that defence of the Australian continent was the main task of the Australian Armed Forces, how realistic is it to expect Japanese and Australian military cooperation to move beyond the peacekeeping sphere?
The question goes to the possibilities of moving beyond peacekeeping as a area of activity for Australia-Japan security cooperation.
Sure.
As Mr. Anderson mentioned, I think there is a good area for cooperation, naval cooperation between the two countries. I mentioned Guam. Guam has become a very important for all of us, US, Japan, and Australia. Japan and the naval forces, they do more work in the sea lanes between Japan and the Guam area. And Australia can work between the area between Guam and Australia. That way, we may be able to control maybe not full control, but working with the United States, we can increase our control over this sea lanes in the Western Pacific.
Allan, do you want to say?
Well, as I said to you, that defence cooperation, there's a great need for it in humanitarian disaster relief, that sort of area. So that's something we had to do anyway, so we need to get better at it. And the sort of more military type cooperation is still in the reconstruction and peacekeeping and nation building type area. So if you're actually asking the next question, are we likely to see sort of joint expeditionary forces, there's no suggestion of that, and obviously Japan's constitutional limitations, even if we were so minded, would rule that out for the moment. So it's not on the horizon anywhere.
I think we had a question.
My name is Rosemary Ganley. I was fascinated by the comment that there would be a rethinking of the constitutional clause that may allow Japan to export defence goods. Does this mean Japanese companies can now tender for ADF contracts, DMO? Are we likely to see Japan part of our commercial defence world in the future?
This is a question that relates to the possible relaxation of Japan's arms exports. I don't know if Allan or Dr. Nishihara would like to address both, maybe both.
Well, what I will say is that there's questions about the legal interpretation as to what they can do, what they can't do. Certainly there's big pressure from Japanese industry saying that their own defence capability is failing because there's not enough critical mass in terms of development and production of their own defence materials, and so they've got the government under a lot of pressure. It's being considered. Are there things that Japan might make that Australia might be interested in? They have very advanced submarine technology, but it's one of these things that's a work in progress. So there's nothing there. There won't be tendering next week.
No.
Rather than Japanese companies participate in tendering, Japanese companies, when they produce arms, they can export, or they may participate in co-production of arms. But I think there will be a rather difficult step to Japan at the moment. But I think the first step is for Japan to export arms to certain countries, not all of the countries.
No.
Those countries who participate strictly compliant with NPT or that kind of regulations.
Just add a word of context on that as well. So it will be well known to this audience that Japanese military spending, despite having a constitution that says it will have no military, is actually, depends on who's you're looking at, but somewhere in the top 5 of the world. Well, why is that coming about? Well, part of the reason that comes about is because of the 1980s and the trade deficit with the United States. Buying military equipment was one way that you could address that trade deficit. So taking that thinking and moving it to 2010, where you've got a stagnant Japanese heavy industry, the appeal of being able to develop that and export it has a greater economic rationale beyond just the military security interest.
I had a question in the front here. Come back.
Thanks very much. John Harwood from Defence. I was wondering whether you see Article 9 of the Constitution as being the real anchor to furthering development, or is it the self-imposed ban on collective self-defence that's the real impediment for us moving forward? Two questions I imagine, Dr. Nishihara. Is there appetite within Japan for a review of that ban on collective self-defence? And then for the panel, if there is appetite, would that then make things a lot easier for us to progress beyond just exercising in peacekeeping and humanitarian assistance?
The question goes to the mood in Japan on collective self-defence and the implications that any change there would have for regional relationships.
Yes, I would like to say there's a growing voice calling for the revision of the interpretation of Article 9. But still, the top leadership of the DPJ government is not fully committed to this kind of situation. Well, recently, the defense experts panel, which had the report calling for the modification of our interpretation of the Constitution, but I think it's slow. There is a impediment in our case. For example, if you want to do more international peace-building activities, then our forces may not be able to go to the area where we have to involve the fightings and so forth. Then that really restricts of participation. There's a call that we should revise that sort of restrictions. So that may come in the future.
That's the definitive view, I think. I'm happy with that.
I'll add a word or two. Add a word or two. I imagine Nishihara-sensei and I hang out in different places with different people in Japan, and so I'm not surprised that we have slightly different takes on this. I think the appetite for constitutional reform is less than has been represented in the English press, significantly less than has been represented in the English press. I think the Japanese press has a deeper context in which it's operating in, and people are able to read through that. But the way it's been reported in the English press, I think, is that this is something imminent, and I don't think that's the case. What I would say is there's very much a generational attitude about this. And if you look at Japan's demographics, it looks like a mushroom. It doesn't look like a normal demographics, like a pyramid. And the baby boomers are the big bit up here. Those people all came through school in the 50s and the 60s having a very American education and being very hesitant or being more pro Article 9 than the current crop, the current younger people. And the current younger people, I think sometimes would be saying as nationalists, and I don't think that's the case. I just see them more as apathetic. So that apathy is coming through. But then added to that, the current stuff with, for example, senkaku, and I think that's changing. So I do agree with Nishihara-sensei that it is changing and we might get there. The speed at which it happens, I think I'd be a little bit more cautious.
Thanks.
Rob Floyd from Prime Minister of Cabinet. I'm interested in your two perspectives, given that you hang out at different bars in Japan.
I'm happy to go have an egg. Just none of my friends are over there. So.
On the appetite in Japan to cooperate with Australia and others on global security initiatives such as non-proliferation and disarmament. It was an issue that Allan mentioned, but I didn't hear any references in your speeches on this issue. What's the resonance, what's the interest in Japan on issues like non-proliferation and disarmament?
The question relates to current Japanese attitudes towards involvement in international initiatives on arms control and disarmament.
Yes, on the whole, Japanese are strongly in favor of non-proliferation disarmament. And last year, Japan and Australia worked together to produce a report about it. So I think there's a strong voice supporting on this one.
Absolutely. I think it's the sense of positiveness around that issue is incredibly strong. Yeah, very, very much so.
In the middle.
So there's a mention of the rise of China in
The question relates to Japanese attitudes towards the situation in North Korea and its implications for Australian policy.
For Japan, if you ask what are the real source of security threats, many Japanese have been saying that North Korea, because nuclear weapons, the kind of words they use vis-a-vis Japan, very hostile remarks toward Japan. So in that sense, China was less threatened. But last few months, I think the situation has changed. The Japanese perceptions of China has really gotten worse. So in that sense, there is a slight change. But nonetheless, North Korea's nuclear possibilities is an issue for us. If Australia can do something about it, Australia can do something about this abduction issues, that would be a great help for Japanese-Australian relationships.
See what we can do.
Just one small thing. I absolutely agree with Nishihara Sensei's response. The only thing I would add to that, another issue which we didn't really talk about, but is Taiwan. So North Korea is there as well, but particularly when you look at Senkaku, that gets into a Taiwan issue. And yeah, I think the analysis is similar.
Andrew Lindbergh, I appreciate the views of the panel on the growing incomparable, and that is the views and the engagements of the United States of America in this part of the world. Given their, as Nobel Rising economist Paul Krugman calls it, the US is in danger of entering the lost decade, such as Japan has gone through. How that factor might play with future US engagements in the region?
Question. I'll just repeat the question if I can, just so that I can get it on the podcast. The question relates to the future of US policy engagement